The Hall of Aligned Worlds was carved into the belly of an asteroid so old it had its own weather. Storm patterns drifted through the hollow center, purple and slow, while below them 193 species sat in tiered rows that climbed so high the top seats vanished into artificial cloud cover. The architecture made a point before anyone opened their mouth. You are small. The galaxy is not. Admiral Shin Yi-bin stood at the petitioner's platform. The platform sat at the lowest point of the chamber, a circle of polished stone deliberately positioned so that every species in attendance could look down at whoever stood on it. The design was not subtle. It was not meant to be. Yi-bin had stood on it 4 times in 11 years. She knew the exact temperature of the stone through her boots. She knew which delegations whispered when she approached and which ones simply stopped talking altogether, which was worse. She wore a pressed uniform. Dark fabric, clean lines, no medals. Medals were for rooms where people already respected you. This was not that room. The United Earth Coalition formally requests elevation from observer status to full Security Council membership, she said. Her voice carried without effort. The chamber's acoustics were designed for species with vocal ranges humans could not produce, but Yi-bin had learned where to stand so the resonance caught her frequencies and carried them upward. She had learned this on her second visit. She learned most things on her second try. We cite our sustained deployment along the fringe corridor, our 7 completed stabilization operations, and our willingness to. The sound came from the 4th tier. Vet. Amused. Like a boot pulling out of mud. High Legislator Dren leaned forward. He was amphibian, tall even seated, with mottled blue-green skin that shifted color when he was performing for an audience. Right now his skin was almost teal. He was enjoying himself immensely. Forgive the interruption, Admiral, Dren said, not meaning a single syllable of it. He gestured with one of his 8 fingers, a lazy upward flick, and the chamber's central display activated. A holographic projection filled the air above Yi-bin's head. Her own species, rotating slowly in blue light. Biological profile. Full readout. Average lifespan, 78.4 standard cycles. Muscle density, low moderate. Sensory range, visible spectrum only. Natural armor, none. Venom, none. Regenerative capability, negligible. Telepathic index, 0.
Evolutionary combat spécialisation, inclassified.
Dren let the data hang there. I want to be certain the chamber understands what is being proposed, he said. He stood now, his full height unfolding in that boneless amphibian way that made him look like something poured rather than something that rose. Species 4817, lovely people, truly, is requesting a seat on the body responsible for galactic security. He paused. Timing. He was good at this. Might I ask, Admiral, what, precisely, would your species secure? Laughter. It came in different shapes from different throats. The Kethrani clicked their mandibles in rapid staccato. The Voss emitted a low rumble that Yi-bin felt in her sternum. The Pelori, 3 rows up, made a sound like glass wind chimes in a storm. Different languages. Different biologies. Same meaning. Dren continued. He was not done. The fringe corridor deployments, and I use the term loosely, as one might call a child arranging toy soldiers a deployment, were granted as a courtesy. A gesture of inclusion. The corridor is the lowest threat operational zone in Coalition territory. We assigned your people there because, he spread 4 of his 8 hands, palms up. Where else would we put you? More laughter. Louder this time. Yi-bin could identify which species found this funniest by volume. The Taurani delegation, she noticed, did not laugh. They didn't consider humans worth the effort of an emotional response. That was its own category of dismissal. Dren turned to the chamber with the confidence of a creature who had never, in his entire life, been struck. Humans are Class C soft-skinned. Short-lived. No natural weapons of any biological significance. They are, and I say this with genuine affection, the galaxy's hall monitors. He sat back down. His skin shifted to a satisfied jade. Petition noted. I believe we have more pressing matters. The chamber moved on. A trade dispute between the Kethrani and the Voss. Mineral rights. Someone's moon. The usual. Yi-bin had not moved. She pressed one button on her data tablet. A single line entered the official record. She read it aloud, as protocol required. though protocol did not require her to read it the way she did, flat, unhurried, the verbal equivalent of setting down a glass with excessive care. The 7th Rapid Response Unit is currently en route to the Torani front on Kesser IV. We request the Council revisit this conversation in 14 days. Dren waved a hand without looking at her. Already done. Already forgotten. Yibin stepped off the platform. Her boots left the cold stone and met the carpet of the exit corridor, and she walked out of the Hall of Aligned Worlds the way she had walked in. Spine straight, pace measured, face carrying absolutely nothing a camera or a diplomat could use. In the recorder's alcove, a small alcove carved into the chamber wall like a wound that healed wrong, Archivist Pell processed the session. Pell was insectoid. Compact. 6-limbed. They had 2 large hands for documentation and 2 smaller hands below their thorax that served no official function but tended to move when Pell was unsettled. Pell logged the petition. Denied. They logged Dren's remarks. They logged the chamber's response. Then Pell did something they rarely did. They reviewed the biometric data captured from the petitioner's platform. Heart rate, respiration, galvanic skin response. Standard monitoring for all petitioners. Most species showed elevated stress markers during rejection. Some showed shame. A few showed anger. Admiral Shin Yibin's readings were flat. Not suppressed. Not controlled through breathing exercises or chemical dampeners, which Pell could detect. Flat. As in, the woman who had just been laughed at by 193 species in the most powerful chamber in the galaxy had experienced no stress response whatsoever. Pell looked at the data for a long time. Their lower hands trembled, just slightly, in a way they did not fully understand. They flagged the observation, filed it under species 4817, anomalous behavioral note, and moved on to the trade dispute. The file sat in the archive, quiet and patient, like a seed that did not yet know what kind of tree it would become. Kesser IV smelled like burning metal and wet soil, and the combination sat in the back of the throat like a warning the body understood before the brain caught up. The forward operating base was a sprawl of prefabricated shelters and cargo containers arranged in a pattern that had once been orderly and was now just survived in. Mud everywhere. Equipment stacked where it shouldn't be. Soldiers from 6 different species moving between structures with the particular slowness of people who had stopped believing the next day would be different from this one. Morale was not low. Morale had left the building, walked into the tree line, and not come back. Sergeant Quan Taisu stepped off the transport with 41 soldiers behind him. 42 humans total. They carried standard-issue coalition rifles, field packs, and the quiet focus of people who had been briefed on the flight and had spent the descent not talking. The intake officer, a Pelori with translucent skin and 3 too many eyes, scanned their unit designation, checked it twice, and logged them as auxiliary support, non-combat role assumed. Taisu did not correct the entry. He signed where indicated and walked his people toward the barracks assignment at the eastern edge of the base. The eastern edge was the farthest point from the command center, the armory, and anything that mattered. This was not an accident. The command briefing happened 2 hours later in a tent that smelled like ozone and the chemical the Kethrani used instead of sweat. A half-circle of officers from 4 species stood around a terrain projection that floated at chest height, rotating slowly, showing the highland ridge where the Torani had dug in like a fist that would not open. General Vorik, the Kethrani field commander, ran the briefing. He was enormous. 6 legs, armored thorax, mandibles that moved when he thought. His species had been the Coalition's premier ground force for 2 centuries, and he carried that history in his posture the way some men carry money. Constantly, visibly, without apology. The situation was straightforward in the way that losing is always straightforward. The Torani held the ridge. They outnumbered the Coalition 4-1. Their carapace armor, a natural biological plating reinforced with bonded alloys, absorbed or deflected standard plasma fire. 9 worlds had fallen to Torani ground campaigns. The tactical doctrine was not complicated. They advanced. You retreated. You retreated slower if you were brave and faster if you were smart, but you retreated. Vorik outlined the plan. Controlled withdrawal to secondary positions. Consolidation of remaining assets. Preservation of personnel for redeployment. He used words like strategic repositioning and resource management, and every word was a small, clean lie wrapped around the truth, which was, they were losing and they intended to lose in an organized fashion. Taisu sat in the back row. He was the only human in the tent. He had not been invited. He had walked in, sat down, and no one had told him to leave because no one had noticed him, or if they had, they did not consider his presence meaningful enough to address. He watched the terrain map, the ridge, the valley, the canyon network that ran beneath the ridge like veins under skin. He studied it the way a man studies a locked door, not with frustration, but with the calm certainty that doors are built by people, and people make mistakes. After the briefing, Vorik assigned unit deployments. He reached the human contingent last. Your unit will handle realign cargo escort, Vorik said. He did not look at Taisu when he said it. He was already looking at the next item on his list. Medical supply convoys between the base and the southern depot. Appropriate for your capabilities.
Corporal Junana, standing behind Taisu, grinned.
It was not a polite grin. It was the grin of someone who had just been handed the keys to a building and told it was a storage closet when she could see perfectly well it was an armory. Vorik did not see the grin. If he had, he would not have understood it. The Kethrani did not grin. They had mandibles. Mandibles did not do this.
Taisu non tai nodded.
Understood, General. 2 words. Flat. The verbal equivalent of a receipt. Back at the human barracks, Taisu held his own briefing.
No terrain projection. No floating maps.
He taped a printout to the wall, the canyon network, hand annotated in black ink during the command briefing while Vorik was explaining how to lose gracefully. He spoke for 6 minutes. The unit listened the way soldiers listen when the person talking has earned the right to be heard not through rank but through the specific quality of silence they carry. Harane would rig the canyon network. Shape charges. Sequenced detonation. She would need materials, and she would get them from the medical supply convoys they had been so generously assigned to escort. Convoys carry more than bandages, she said. Nobody asked her to elaborate. Private Bak Ji-ho would establish a forward trauma station. Not behind the coalition line. Inside it. As far forward as the fighting reached. Taisu looked at Ji-ho when he said this, looked at him the way you look at someone you are asking to stand in a place where standing might cost them everything, and Ji-ho nodded once. His face was young. His nod was not. There was one thing Taisu needed from the coalition. The resonant frequency of Taurani carapace armor. Every material had one. A vibration point where molecular bonds weakened. Find it, match it, and the hardest shell in the galaxy became glass. He submitted a formal data request through coalition channels. The response came in 40 minutes. Denied. Classified information. Restricted to Class A species and above. Taisu read the denial. Folded the tablet closed. Looked at Harane. Harane was already smiling again. That smile. The one that meant she was going to do something the manual said could not be done, and she was going to do it with tools the manual said were not designed for this purpose, and when it was finished someone with more degrees than her was going to stare at it and feel something they could not name. I'll find it myself, she said.
Taisu non tai nodded.
That was the end of the briefing. Outside, the sky of Kesserai V was a bruised orange, and the Taurani ridge was a dark line against it like a wound that hadn't scabbed. Night came fast on this planet. The darkness had weight. Ji-ho sat on an overturned crate outside the barracks, cleaning his medkit. Each instrument removed, wiped, checked, replaced. A ritual. His hands moved with the practiced ease of repetition, the kind of muscle memory that comes from doing something so many times your fingers forget they ever didn't know how. A Kethrani soldier walked past. Massive. 400 pounds of chitin and purpose. The soldier paused, looked down at Ji-ho, this small, soft, impossibly fragile creature sitting in the dirt cleaning tools designed to repair damage that this planet was about to inflict in abundance, and said something in trade common. You should write your death letters now. The Taurani push at dawn. Ji-ho looked up. He was 22 years old and had the face of someone who should be in a university library arguing about something that didn't matter. He held a pair of surgical forceps in his right hand. His grip did not change. Thank you, he said. I'll keep that in mind. He went back to cleaning. The Kethrani stood there for a moment longer, mandibles still, trying to process what had just happened. The human had not argued, had not puffed up, had not shown fear. He had simply continued doing what he was doing with the calm of a creature that had already made its calculations and found them acceptable. The Kethrani walked away. Something small and unfamiliar shifted in the architecture of their certainty, like a crack in a wall that would not matter until it did. The night settled over Kesserai V. In the human barracks, No one wrote death letters. Harane was already pulling apart a captured armor fragment with a plasma cutter. Taisu was studying canyon maps in the dark. Jiho finished his medkit, closed it, and slept the way soldiers sleep when they have decided, quietly, privately, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, that tomorrow they will do the thing they came to do. At 2 in the morning, the barrack smelled like scorched polymer and coffee that had been reheated so many times it had become a different substance entirely. Yoon Harane sat cross-legged on the floor with a captured Torani armor fragment pinned between her knees and a plasma cutter in her right hand that she was using with the precision of a surgeon and the enthusiasm of a child with a new toy. The fragment was the size of a dinner plate. Dark. Dense. It had a faint iridescence under certain light, like oil on water, and when she tapped it with a wrench it produced a sound that was almost musical, a low hum that lingered 2 seconds longer than it should have. That hum was the whole game. She cut the fragment into 4 pieces, measured each one with a field spectrometer that was technically rated for soil analysis, not molecular resonance testing, but Harane had long ago stopped caring what tools were rated for. Tools did what you made them do. Rating was a suggestion. She was not a woman who followed suggestions. 3 hours. 4 burnt fingers. A vocabulary of Korean words her mother would have been horrified to hear and deeply unsurprised by. She found it. The resonant frequency of Torani carapace armor sat at 3,847 Hz, a tight, specific vibration point where the molecular bonds in the alloy biological composite weakened by 63%. At that frequency, the armor did not deflect, did not absorb. It became brittle in the way that ice becomes brittle just before it shatters, still hard, still cold, but waiting for the tap that would unmake it. Harane wrote the number on her palm in black ink. She stared at it for a long time. Then she started laughing. Quiet laughter, the kind that lives in the chest and doesn't bother going to the throat. The kind that comes when you solve a problem everyone told you was impossible, and the answer turns out to be so simple it's almost rude. The modifications began at 0300. Standard issue coalition plasma rifles fired at a flat frequency, a broad spectrum pulse designed to be adequate against a wide range of materials. Adequate. Harane hated that word. It was the engineering equivalent of fine, I guess. She pulled the frequency modulator from each rifle, recalibrated it to 3,847 Hz using a soldering kit, 2 battery packs from field radios, and a resonance chip she had removed from, and this was the part she enjoyed most, the guidance system of a medical supply crate. The very crates their unit had been assigned to escort. The convoys were indeed carrying more than bandages. Each modified rifle looked like it had been assembled during a natural disaster by someone who was angry at the concept of elegance. Wires exposed. Housing cracked and retaped. Frequency modulators held in place by field adhesive that was one ambient temperature shift away from giving up entirely. They were ugly in the way that only functional things can be ugly, the ugliness of something that has abandoned every priority except working. 42 rifles. Modified in 4 hours. Harane's fingers were burned, cut, and stained with solder residue. She flexed them and grinned. A Kethrani engineer named Torek had been watching from the barracks entrance for the last 90 minutes. He had come to deliver a supply manifest and had not left. He stood in the doorway, mandibles half open, the Kethrani equivalent of slack-jawed. "What are you doing to those weapons?" he asked. Harane held up a rifle. It looked like a machine that had gone through a difficult divorce. Frequency tuning. 3,847 Hz. Resonant point of Torani carapace. Torek's mandibles closed. Opened. Closed again. That frequency is classified. Was classified. I found it myself. The recalibration you are describing requires a resonance laboratory. Controlled environment. Precision instruments rated to. Harane pointed the rifle at a test plate they had propped against the far wall, a section of Torani armor mounted on a cargo frame. She fired once. The pulse hit the plate with a sound like a bell cracking. The plate split. Not a scratch. Not a dent. A clean, structural fracture that ran from top to bottom as if the material had simply decided to stop being one piece and become two. Torek stared at the plate. He stared for a very long time. Harane ejected the battery pack, slotted in a fresh one, and moved to the next rifle. She did not explain further. The plate had done the explaining. While Harane rebuilt the arsenal, Kwon Taisu sat in the corner of the barracks with the canyon map spread across his knees and a pencil behind his ear that he kept forgetting was there. He had been studying the terrain for 7 hours. The map was now more ink than print, routes traced, distances calculated, elevation changes noted in his small, precise handwriting. The coalition had been fighting the Torani on the ridge. High ground. Every species in the coalition agreed on this. You can test the high ground. This was doctrine. This was wisdom. This was 12 species worth of military tradition saying the same thing in different languages. Taisu did not agree. The canyon network ran beneath the ridge like a root system, narrow, deep, winding through the rock in channels carved by water that had dried up 10,000 years ago. The coalition had mapped it and dismissed it. Too narrow for Kethrani soldiers. Too unstable for heavy equipment. No cover. No retreat path. A one-way trip into a geological coffin. For most species, this assessment was correct. Taisu traced the route with his finger. Entry point, southern canyon mouth, 4 kilometers from the base. Path, 7 kilometers through the canyon network, trending northeast, climbing gradually. Exit point, a drainage fissure that opened 200 meters behind the Torani supply depot. Behind their line. Behind their armor. Behind every assumption they had built their campaign on. The route required sustained movement over rough terrain for approximately 90 minutes.
No stops.
No rest.
No vehicles.
Just legs and lungs and the particular cruelty of human physiology that the galaxy's biological profiles captured as moderate endurance and completely failed to understand. Humans were not fast. Every predator species in the coalition could outrun a human in a sprint. This was true, and it was also completely irrelevant, because humans were not built to sprint. They were built to run at a steady pace, over broken ground, in heat, carrying weight, 4 hours. 4 days. For as long as the thing they were chasing had legs to carry it. Evolution had looked at the human blueprint and decided against claws, against venom, against armor, against every weapon the rest of the galaxy considered essential, and had instead invested everything into a single, terrible capability. Humans did not stop. Taisu calculated the pace. Calculated the load. Calculated the oxygen levels in the canyon, the temperature differential, the likelihood of structural collapse in 3 sections where the walls narrowed to shoulder width. He wrote each number cleanly. He circled the exit point. At 0500, he walked to the Coalition Command Center and presented his operational plan to General Vorik. Vorik looked at the map. Looked at the route. Looked at the entry point and the exit point and the 7 kilometers of geological throat between them. This is a death march, Vorik said. His mandibles were tight. Not anger. Something closer to confusion, which for a Kethrani general was far more uncomfortable. You are proposing to move your entire unit through an unmapped canyon system with no support, no extraction route, and no margin for delay, to emerge behind a Torani position defended by 3,000 armored soldiers. He looked at Taisu. Sergeant, you are sending your people to die. Taisu met his gaze. His eyes held the particular stillness of water that is deeper than it looks. Yes. Possibly. File your objection. The words sat in the air between them like a stone dropped into a pond. Vorik had commanded coalition forces for 30 years. He had been spoken to by generals, by admirals, by heads of state. He had never been spoken to like this by a sergeant from a Class C species. The sentence was not rude. Was not aggressive. It was something worse. It was calm. Vorik filed no objection. Not because he approved. Because some part of him, a part older than training, older than doctrine, a part that still remembered what it felt like to be prey, recognized something in Quan Taisu's stillness that his conscious mind refused to name. Taisu walked back to the barracks. The first light of Kesarai's sun was creeping over the ridge, turning the Torani positions into dark silhouettes against an orange sky. Harane had finished the rifles. Jiho had packed his trauma station into a single carry bag. The unit was awake, dressed, armed, and silent. Taisu looked at them. Nodded once. They knew what the nod meant. Dawn broke over Kesaraiv like a wound reopening. The sky split from dark to orange in the space of 12 minutes, and the Torani began their push before the color had finished settling. 3,000 armored soldiers moved down the highland ridge in formation. Disciplined. Geometric. Each one encased in carapace plating that caught the morning light and threw it back in dark bronze flashes. They moved the way a tide moves, not fast, not slow, but with the absolute certainty of something that has never been turned back. 9 worlds had watched this same descent. 9 worlds had broken. The coalition line braced. Kethrani heavy infantry locked positions behind fortified berms. Pelori marksmen found elevation. Voss artillery units powered up their plasma batteries with the mechanical hum of machines that knew their own inadequacy. General Vorik stood in the command tent watching the tactical display, mandibles tight, issuing orders that were really just variations of the same instruction. Hold as long as you can, then don't die while leaving. No one was watching the Eastern Canyon mouth 4 km south. At 0430, 30 minutes before the Taurani moved, Quan Taisu's unit had already gone. 42 humans slipped into the canyon in single file.
No announcement.
No coordination with coalition command.
No farewell.
They simply were in the barracks, and then they were not. The canyon was narrow. In places the walls pressed close enough that soldiers had to turn sideways, pack scraping stone. The floor was loose rock and dried sediment that shifted underfoot in ways that demanded attention with every step. Above them, the walls rose 30 meters to a sliver of orange sky that grew thinner as the path descended and then climbed and then descended again like the throat of something breathing. They ran. Not sprinted. Running. Steady. The pace Taisu had calculated. Fast enough to cover 7 kilometers in 90 minutes. Slow enough to arrive capable of fighting. A pace that would have broken a Kethrani in 40 minutes, gassed a Pelori in 20, and confused a Taurani entirely because the Taurani did not run. They marched. Running was what prey did. The humans ran in near darkness.
No headlamps.
Taisu had forbidden them. Their eyes adjusted. Not well. Not like a species with night vision or thermal sensing. Just enough. Enough was the human margin. Always had been. The species that survived not because it was best at anything but because it was adequate at everything and refused to acknowledge any situation as impossible. Jiho ran in the middle of the formation. His trauma kit bounced against his spine with each step, a rhythm he had synchronized his breathing to because his body had learned long ago to make partners of the things that burdened it. He was 22 and he was running through a canyon on an alien world toward a battle he might not survive, and his heartbeat was elevated but steady, the heartbeat of someone who had made a decision and was now simply living inside it. 91 minutes. They emerged from the drainage fissure into daylight that hit like a slap. Taisu dropped to one knee, rifle up, scanning. 200 meters ahead, the Taurani rear echelon. Supply depot. Ammunition stores. Communication relay. The logistic spine that kept 3,000 soldiers on the ridge armed, fed, and coordinated. Unguarded. Not lightly guarded. Not guarded with a skeleton crew. Unguarded. Because nothing came through the canyon. Nothing could. This was known. This was fact. The Taurani had not posted sentries on a geological impossibility, and the humans had just made impossibility a matter of opinion.
Hektarów moved.
11 minutes. That was all she needed. She placed shape charges at 11 points across the depot, ammunition stores, fuel cells, communication arrays, structural supports, each one positioned with a precision that belied the speed of placement. She had rehearsed this in her head during the canyon run. Every step through the dark had been accompanied by a mental blueprint of where each charge would go, what it would touch, what it would destroy and, more importantly, what it would destroy next. Shape charges did not simply explode. They directed force. Harane's charges were placed so that each detonation would channel its energy into the next detonation point. Not a series of explosions. A cascade. A sentence written in fire where each word made the next word inevitable. She looked at Taisu. Held up a closed fist. Ready. Taisu looked at his unit. 42 faces. Dirty. Winded. Ready. He dropped his fist. Harane pressed the trigger. The Taurani supply depot did not explode. It was disassembled. The first charge tore through the ammunition store and the heat from that detonation cooked the fuel cells adjacent and the fuel cells burst inward, because Harane had shaped the charge to direct force toward the communication relay, and the relay tower came apart in a shower of metal and flame that rained onto the secondary ammunition cache, which went up with a sound that was less an explosion and more a sentence being finished. The noise reached the ridge. On the Taurani front line, 3,000 soldiers in mid-advance felt the ground shake beneath them and turned to see their supply depot become a pillar of black smoke and twisting light. Communications went dead. The armored soldiers had no contact with their command. No supply line.
No resupply.
No information about what had happened behind them because the thing that told them things had just stopped existing. Then the shooting started. Quan Taisu's unit opened fire from the Fisher Line. 42 rifles. Modified. Frequency tuned. The first volley hit the nearest Taurani rear guard, and the pulse rounds struck their carapace at 3,847 Hz. The armor shattered. Not cracked. Not dented. Shattered. The molecular bonds that had held the strongest natural armor in the galaxy together for millions of years of evolution came apart like sugar glass hit with a hammer. Taurani soldiers, creatures who had never, in the recorded military history of the galaxy, been penetrated by small arms fire through their carapace, stumbled, fell, looked down at their own bodies with an expression that transcended species, the universal face of something encountering the impossible. The second volley followed the first by 3 seconds. The third volley followed the second. Taisu's unit fired with the mechanical discipline of people who had drilled this exact scenario until their muscles performed it without consulting their brains. Move. Fire. Move. Fire. The canyon fissure gave them cover. The smoke from the depot gave them concealment. The frequency gave them the one thing no one had ever given a human unit fighting Taurani. A fair fight. On the ridge, the Taurani advance stalled. Cut off from supply. Cut off from communication. Hearing the sound of their own rear echelon being taken apart by a species that was supposed to be escorting medical supplies. The front ranks pressed forward by momentum and training, but the middle ranks hesitated, and the rear ranks, the ones close enough to hear carapace breaking, stopped. Then they ran. Not a retreat. A rout. The formation broke the way a dam breaks, not piece by piece but all at once, a structural failure that turned order into chaos in the space of a held breath. 3,000 Taurani soldiers who had never been routed, whose species had not lost a ground campaign in 400 years, broke formation and fled up the ridge, away from the smoking ruin of their supply line, away from the impossible sound of their own armor failing. The coalition line watched. General Vorik stood in the command tent. The tactical display showed the Taurani retreat in real time, blue markers scattering, defensive positions abandoned, the ridge emptying like a theater after the lights come on. He stared at the display. His mandibles had stopped moving entirely. No one in the command tent spoke. The silence lasted a long time. When the fighting stopped, the ridge was empty and the valley was full of smoke, and the sun had climbed high enough to turn the sky from orange to white. Private Bak Ji-ho walked through the debris field with his trauma kit open and his hands steady and his face carrying the particular calm of someone who has decided that this exact thing, this moment, this work, is what he was put here to do. He knelt beside a fallen Taurani soldier. The soldier's carapace was cracked along the thorax. Blood, dark, almost purple, seeped from the fracture. The soldier's eyes, 4 of them, tracked Ji-ho as he approached. The eyes held something that might have been fear and might have been rage, and was probably both, because the creature that had hurt him was now the creature kneeling beside him.
Jeho applied a compress.
Gentle. Precise. He did not speak because he did not know the words, and the words did not matter. His hands spoke. They said, "I am here. You are hurt. I will help. This is not complicated." The Taurani soldier said something. Low. Guttural. Ji-ho did not understand the language. He understood the tone. It was the sound of a world rearranging itself inside someone's head. The sound of every assumption, every certainty, every known thing about the universe shifting just enough to let something new in. Something that had no name yet. Something that frightened the soldier more than the shattered armor, more than the burning depot, more than the 42 soft-skinned creatures who had just dismantled an unbeatable army with duct tape and stubbornness. Ji-ho finished the compress, patted the soldier's shoulder, moved to the next wounded. He did not distinguish between sides. There were no sides in a debris field. There were only people who were hurt and a boy with a medkit who refused to find that complicated. That evening, Quan Taisu filed his after-action report through standard coalition channels. Format: standard. Language: standard. Tone: the flat bureaucratic prose of a man describing the weather. 42 deployed. 3 killed in action. 11 wounded. Enemy casualties: approximately 2,300. Supply infrastructure: total loss. Ridge position: reclaimed. Under additional notes, he wrote 4 words. Request resupply of field tape. He submitted the report. Closed the terminal. Sat in the dark for a while. Somewhere outside, Hana was laughing about something with the remaining soldiers, that bright, jagged laugh of hers that sounded like someone dropping silverware down a staircase.
Tai sunnuntai listenne torstai IT.
Let it exist. Let the day be over. 3 of his people were dead. He did not write their names in the report because the report had a format and the format did not ask for names. He wrote their names on a piece of paper he kept in his breast pocket. He had done this before. The paper was not new. He folded it, put it back, closed his eyes. 14 days is not a long time. Stars do not move. Empires do not change. Legislation crawls through committee the way sediment becomes rock, slowly, with pressure, over periods that make individual days meaningless. But rooms change. The Hall of Aligned Worlds was the same asteroid. Same carved amphitheater. Same purple storms drifting through the hollow center. Same 193 species in tiered rows climbing toward artificial clouds. Same petitioner's platform at the lowest point, positioned so that every delegation could look down at whoever stood on it.
Admiral Shin Yebin stood on it.
Same pressed uniform. Same posture. Same unsettling blink rate that 3 xenobiologists across the galaxy had independently flagged as statistically anomalous for a species with standard mammalian optic reflexes. She stood the way she had stood 14 days ago, and the way she had stood every time she had been on this platform, like a woman who had memorized the weight of the room and found it manageable. 14 days ago, she said, I requested this council revisit a conversation. I am here to revisit it. The chamber did not laugh. This was the first difference. 14 days ago, the chamber had been a concert hall of species-specific amusement. Clicks, rumbles, chimes, the whole galaxy's inventory of sounds that meant the same thing. Now the chamber was quiet in the way that a room is quiet when everyone in it has read the same report, and no one wants to be the first to acknowledge what it said. High Legislator Dren was present. 4th tier. Same seat. His skin, which 14 days ago had shifted through confident teals and satisfied jades, was holding at a flat grey blue. Neutral. Controlled. His 8 fingers rested on the armrests of his chair and they were very, very still. Yibin looked at the archivist's alcove and nodded. Archivist Pell emerged. Small. Insectoid. 6-limbed. Carrying a data tablet in their 2 upper hands and trembling slightly in their 2 lower ones. A tremor they had not been able to stop since reading the Kesser IV file for the first time 4 days ago. Pell was neutral. Pell had been neutral for 40 years. Neutrality was not the same as immunity. At the petitioner's request, Pell said, the following after-action report will be read into the permanent record. Kesser IV engagement. Coalition's 7th Rapid Response Unit. Species 4817. Human. Pell read the report. They read it the way they read everything. Flat, precise, without editorial. The numbers did the work. 42 deployed. Canyon insertion. 7 kilometers, 91 minutes, on foot, in darkness. Supply depot destruction. Total. Weapon modification. Field improvised frequency tuning at 3,847 Hz, achieved without laboratory equipment, without classified data access, using components salvaged from medical supply convoys. Taurani carapace penetration. Confirmed. First instance in recorded galactic military history. Enemy casualties, approximately 2,300. Coalition casualties, 3 killed, 11 wounded. Ridge position, reclaimed. Pell paused at the casualty ratio. 42 against 3,000. 3 dead. 2,300 enemy down. The chamber held the number the way a throat holds something it cannot swallow. Pell continued. They reached the final section of the report, the field addendum filed by the unit's medical officer describing post-engagement treatment of wounded combatants. Both sides. Private Bak Ji-ho, age 22, administered emergency care to 14 wounded Taurani soldiers in the debris field, including the application of field compressors to carapace fractures and the stabilization of 2 critical status enemy officers for medical evacuation. Pell paused again. This pause was longer. Pell did not pause. In 40 years of service, across thousands of session records, Pell had never introduced silence into an official reading. Silence in the record was not neutral. It was emphasis. Pell knew this. They paused anyway. They continued to the end. Filed the report. Returned to their alcove. The chamber sat in the quiet that follows a detonation, not the explosion itself, but the moment after, when the dust is still in the air and the shape of what used to be there is visible as an absence.
Yebin spoke.
She spoke for 4 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not change her posture. She did not do any of the things that speakers in this chamber typically did to signal importance. No dramatic gestures, no vocal shifts, no appeals to history or morality or shared values. She spoke the way Taisu filed reports. Flat. Clean. Devastating for the absence of decoration. She explained that humanity's 11 years as an observer had not been what the Council believed. The low-threat fringe corridor deployments, the ones Dren had called courtesy postings, hall monitor duty, play soldiering, had been field studies. Every engagement was a data collection exercise. Every species the humans served alongside was observed, catalogued, analyzed.
Combat doctrine.
Communication protocols. Equipment specifications. Psychological responses under fire. 11 years of looking harmless while learning everything about every species in the room. She said, "You gave us the low-risk sector because you believed we could do no harm there. We used it as a laboratory." The sentence landed in the chamber with the weight of something that changes a room's center of gravity. She continued. Humanity was not repetitioning for Security Council membership. Repetitioning implied the original denial had standing. Instead, humanity was establishing a seat under Article 7, subsection 14C of the original Observer Admission Treaty, a clause that permitted elevation to full membership status upon demonstrated military contribution to coalition security operations, provided the contribution met or exceeded threshold metrics in 3 categories: operational success, casualty efficiency, and strategic innovation. HFY V met all 3. By significant margins. Yibin produced the legal brief. Submitted it to the record. Submitted copies to each delegation. The clause had been in the treaty for 11 years. No one had read it carefully. No one reads the fine print on a document signed by something they consider harmless. This is what harmless things count on. Dren stood. His skin was cycling through colors: grey, blue, grey, a flash of something red at the throat that he suppressed. His voice, when he found it, was tighter than 14 days ago. Thinner. "This is irregular," he said. "The elevation process requires a full council vote. The petitioner cannot unilaterally." Article 7, subsection 14C does not require a vote, Yibin said. She did not interrupt him. She simply spoke into the space where his sentence ran out of momentum. It requires verification of threshold metrics by an independent archivist. She looked at Pell. Archivist, do the HFY IV metrics meet the specified thresholds? Pell checked their tablet. Their lower hands were trembling so badly the tablet shook. "They exceed them," Pell said. "In all 3 categories. By margins I am not prepared to quantify in this session, as the numbers are." Pell searched for the word. Found it. Unprecedented. Yibin turned back to Dren. "Legislator," she said. Her voice had not changed. Not once. Not across 14 days and 1 battle and 1 species reclassification and 1 galaxy-altering shift in the balance of power. The same even tone. The same measured cadence. The same absence of anything a diplomat could use as a handhold. "You are welcome to file your objection." The words hung in the amphitheater. They were the same words Taisu had said to Vorik in a command tent on HFY V. They were the same words in the way that a key and its lock are the same shape, one made to fit inside the other. Filed your objection. A sentence that gave the appearance of invitation while communicating, with absolute clarity, that the outcome had been decided before the speaker entered the room. Dren's 8 fingers opened. Closed. Opened. His mouth moved and nothing came out. He sat down. He did not file an objection. The chamber watched him sit, and the chamber said nothing, and the silence was so total that the purple storms drifting through the hollow center of the asteroid seemed loud by comparison. Yibin stepped off the platform. Her boots met the carpet of the exit corridor and she walked out the same way she had walked in, spine straight, pace measured, face carrying nothing, and behind her the Hall of Aligned Worlds sat with the quiet of a room that had just learned something it could not unlearn. In the archivist's alcove, Pell processed the session. They logged the legal brief. They logged Yibin's address. They logged Dren's non-objection. They logged the establishment of Humanity's Security Council seat, species 4817, full membership, effective immediately. Then Pell did something they had not done in 40 years of service. They added a personal annotation to the record. Archivists do not annotate. Archivists record. The distinction is the foundation of their role, the thing that makes them trusted by 193 species, the reason their word is final and their record is law. Pell had maintained this distinction for 4 decades without exception. The annotation read, "Recommend reclassification of species 4817, human. Current designation, Class C, non-threat. Proposed designation, pending. Insufficient data to define upper limit." Pell saved the file, set down their tablet, sat in the alcove for a long time, listening to the chamber empty, species filing out in quiet clusters, the sound of 193 civilizations recalculating. Their lower hands would not stop trembling. They did not try to make them stop. Some things, Pell decided, deserved to be felt before they were understood.